Golden torches flickered against towering walls covered in hieroglyphs as servants bowed low, their faces etched with reverence. High Priest Khepriemhet stood tall at the center of the temple, his arms raised high to the heavens. His voice boomed through the sacred halls, chanting prayers to Ra, the mighty sun god who ruled over life and light. "O great Sunday God, bring light to our land. Grant us your favor and guide Egypt's path." The priests echoed his words, their voices rising like a storm, filling the air with power and devotion. Outside, the first rays of dawn touched the horizon, painting the golden sands with hues of fire. Everyone waited for the sun to rise fully, proof that Ra still blessed them. But something felt wrong. The atmosphere grew heavy, almost suffocating, as if the gods themselves were watching and judging. A faint whisper drifted through the air, cutting through the chants like a blade. It wasn't part of the ritual. When the shadow falls upon Ra, the lowborn shall rise. The priests froze, their eyes darting around the room, searching for the source of the voice. Was it an oracle, a spirit, or just the wind playing tricks? Khepriemhet scowled, his brow furrowing as he tried to maintain control. "Silence! This is no time for distractions," he barked, waving his hand dismissively. But unease spread among the priests like wildfire. Suddenly, the torchlight dimmed, casting long, unnatural shadows across the walls, even though the sun should have been rising higher outside. "What is happening?" muttered a younger priest, his voice trembling. Khepriemhet clenched his fists, his confidence wavering. "Nothing happens without my command. Continue the ritual." Yet doubt lingered in the air, thick as smoke, hinting at darker truths lurking beneath the surface. Near the back of the temple, Sekhmetis moved quietly, carrying a tray of wine cups. She was small and quick, easy to overlook, but her sharp eyes missed nothing. She saw the flickering torches, heard the strange whisper, and most importantly, noticed the cracked sundial in the center of the temple. Her fingers brushed the edge of the artifact as she passed, feeling its warmth, almost as if it were alive. A shiver ran down her spine. What did this mean? Why would such a sacred object be broken? Sekhmetis glanced at Khepriemhet, whose face was hard and angry. He didn't seem worried about the crack or the prophecy. Did he know more than he let on? Her mind raced with questions, but she remained silent, her curiosity burning brighter than the torches around her. The sundial caught the weak morning light, casting fractured shadows on the floor. To Sekhmetis, it looked like a warning, a symbol of chaos creeping into the divine order. Someone had tampered with it, that much was clear. But who? And why? If the sundial was flawed, then the rituals were flawed too. Without proper ceremonies, Ra might abandon Egypt entirely, plunging the kingdom into darkness, not just over the temple, but over the whole land. Sekhmetis hesitated, her heart pounding. Should she speak up? If she told someone, they might punish her for interfering. But if she stayed silent, what would happen to everyone else? For now, she decided to wait, watch, and learn more before acting. The weight of the moment pressed down on her. But she knew one thing for certain. The crack in the sundial was no accident. It was a harbinger of something far greater. Outside the temple, long shadows stretched across the Nile, darkening its shimmering waters. Birds took flight, startled by some unseen force, while the uneven dawn painted the world in shades of gray. Inside, Sekhmetis watched the priests struggle to finish the ritual. The sun refused to rise properly, leaving the world bathed in eerie half-light. Khepriemhet shouted louder, trying to force the gods to obey him, but his commands fell flat, swallowed by the growing tension in the air. Sekhmetis stepped back into the shadows, clutching the empty wine tray. Her heart pounded as she realized whatever was coming, it was bigger than all of them. Somehow, she knew she'd play a part in it, whether she wanted to or not. The prophecy whispered earlier echoed in her mind, sending chills down her spine. The shadow had fallen, and the lowborn would rise, but how? And at what cost? The golden sands of Thebes stretched endlessly under the blazing sun, shimmering like a sea of fire. Towering temples rose from the earth, their stone walls etched with hieroglyphs that told stories of gods and pharaohs. Along the Nile, markets buzzed with life. Merchants called out to sell spices, papyrus scrolls, and amulets carved with the eye of Horus. Fishermen cast nets into the river, their reflections rippling on its surface. But beneath this grandeur lay a darker truth. Slaves toiled in the shadows, their backs bent under heavy loads, their faces hidden by dirt and despair. The contrast between wealth and poverty was stark, a constant reminder of the fragile balance holding the kingdom together. For now, peace reigned, but whispers of unrest lingered like smoke after a fire. High Priest Khepriemhet stood at the heart of it all, a figure both revered and feared. His ceremonial robes shimmered with golden scarabs, and his voice carried authority wherever he went. To the people, he was a bridge between mortals and gods, the one who ensured Ra's favor over Egypt. But behind closed doors, Khepriemhet was a man consumed by ambition. He believed himself untouchable, chosen by Ra to rule over the temple and perhaps even the kingdom. Yet cracks were beginning to show. Rumors whispered of bribes taken, rituals altered for personal gain, and secrets buried deep within the temple's sacred halls. Though no one dared accuse him openly, unease spread among the priests and servants alike. Something wasn't right, and everyone could feel it. Sekhmetis moved through the temple like a shadow, unnoticed yet always watching. She was clever, observant, and quick to piece together fragments of information others dismissed. While serving wine during ceremonies, she listened to the priests' conversations, memorizing details about rituals, prophecies, and the gods. Her sharp mind made her dangerous, though no one realized it yet. Beneath her quiet exterior burned a fierce determination. She dreamed of freedom, not just for herself, but for all those crushed under the weight of oppression. When she noticed the crack in the sundial, her curiosity ignited. What did it mean? Who had tampered with it? And how could she use this knowledge to change her fate, and perhaps the fate of Thebes itself? The Temple of Ra was a place of wonder, filled with towering statues, glowing torches, and chambers lined with ancient texts. But not all was holy within these walls. Hidden rooms held forbidden scrolls, relics of forgotten prophecies, and evidence of corruption that stretched back generations. Servants whispered of strange disappearances who asked too many questions or stumbled upon secrets they weren't meant to know. Sekhmetis felt the weight of these truths pressing down on her as she ventured deeper into the temple's recesses. One night, while exploring a dimly lit corridor, she discovered a scroll sealed with the mark of Anubis. Its contents hinted at betrayal within the priesthood, linking directly to the prophecy she'd overheard. Her hands trembled as she read, realizing the stakes were higher than she'd imagined. The prophecy echoed in Sekhmetis's mind, long after the ritual ended. When the shadow falls upon Ra, the lowborn shall rise. At first, it seemed like a distant threat, something that might never come to pass. But as days turned into weeks, signs began to appear. Statues wept tears of gold, and solar eclipses darkened the sky prematurely. Even the Nile seemed restless, its waters churning as if stirred by unseen forces. Khepriemhet grew increasingly paranoid, accusing servants of sabotage and tightening his grip on the temple. Meanwhile, Sekhmetis found herself drawn to the prophecy, unable to ignore its pull. It spoke of upheaval, of justice for those crushed under tyranny. Could she be the one destined to bring change? Or would she become another victim of the system she sought to overthrow? In Egyptian belief, Maat represented truth, balance, and cosmic harmony. Without it, chaos known as Isfet would consume the world. Sekhmetis understood this better than most. She saw how greed and corruption had disrupted the divine order, angering the gods and endangering the kingdom. The cracked sundial was more than a broken artifact. It symbolized the fractured balance of power. If left unchecked, it would lead to ruin not just for the temple, but for all of Egypt. Determination hardened in her chest. She couldn't stand idly by while injustice festered. But challenging Khepriemhet meant risking everything. As she stood in the temple's shadowy halls, staring at the scales carved into the walls, she knew what she had to do. Justice hung by a thread, and she would fight to tip the scales back toward light. Under the cover of darkness, Sekhmetis slipped through the temple's shadowy corridors, her heart pounding with every step. The air was thick with the scent of aged papyrus and incense, and faint moonlight filtered through narrow windows, casting eerie patterns on the floor. She knew she was risking her life, but the prophecy burned in her mind like a flame. In a hidden chamber, she found scrolls stacked high, their edges brittle with age. Carefully unrolling one, she discovered warnings about corruption within the priesthood's rituals altered, offerings stolen, and lies told in the name of Ra. Her hands trembled as she read, realizing the depth of Khepriemhet's betrayal. This wasn't just about him. It was about restoring balance to all of Egypt. But how could a slave challenge a man who commanded the godsour, so he claimed? The cracked sundial haunted Sekhmetis. It wasn't an accident, it was sabotage. Someone had deliberately tampered with it to manipulate the sacred rituals, ensuring Ra's favor remained tied to Khepriemhet's will. She traced her fingers over the fracture, feeling its jagged edge. This artifact was more than a broken tool. It was proof of his deceit. If she exposed it, she could shatter his power. But doing so meant stepping into the light, revealing herself to a world that would either revere or destroy her. As she stood there, staring at the sundial, she felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her. Failure meant death, but silence meant complicity. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope not just for freedom, but for justice. Sekhmetis couldn't do this alone. She sought out Nabaman, a disgraced scribe who now lived in exile after speaking against corruption. His eyes lit up when she showed him the scrolls, his hands trembling as he deciphered their contents. "This is bigger than you or me," he whispered. "It's about truth." Together, they recruited Isetnofret, a former temple acolyte, disillusioned by the hypocrisy she'd witnessed. Though wary at first, Isetnofret quickly became an ally, sharing secrets about the inner workings of the temple. Their bond grew stronger with each meeting, united by a shared goal to expose Khepriemhet's crimes and restore Ma'at. For the first time, Sekhmetis felt less like a slave and more like a leader, though fear still lingered at the edges of her resolve. Strange omens began appearing across Thebes, stirring both fear and awe. Statues of Ra wept golden tears, and whispers carried by desert winds spoke of judgment to come. One morning, the sun rose only halfway before halting mid-sky, plunging the city into an unnatural twilight. People gathered in the streets, murmuring prayers and clutching amulets. Khepriemhet tried to calm them, claiming the gods were testing their faith, but his voice wavered. Sekhmetis saw these signs as confirmation the gods were watching, waiting for someone to act. She felt their presence everywhere, in the flickering torches, the restless Nile, and the shadows that seemed to stretch longer each day. Courage swelled within her. The time to strike was near. Khepriemhet sensed rebellion brewing beneath the surface. Servants whispered behind his back, and even some priests avoided his gaze. Convinced someone was plotting against him, he began accusing innocent people of sabotage, punishing them harshly to maintain control. Torches burned late into the night as he interrogated servants, his voice sharp and cruel. Yet no matter how many lives he destroyed, the unrest only grew. Sekhmetis watched from the shadows, her anger burning brighter with each injustice. She saw the cracks in his armor, the way his hands shook when he performed rituals, the way his eyes darted nervously during ceremonies. He was afraid, and that gave her strength. The mighty high priest wasn't invincible after all. The festival of Ra loomed ahead, a grand event where thousands would gather to witness the high priest's invocation. It was the perfect stage for exposure, a moment when Khepriemhet's lies would be laid bare for all to see. Sekhmetis and her allies worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and planning their strategy. They rehearsed what to say, how to present the scrolls, and where to stand to ensure maximum impact. Despite their preparation, doubt lingered. What if the crowd turned against them? What if the gods didn't intervene? On the eve of the festival, Sekhmetis stood by the Nile, staring at her reflection in the water. Her face was calm, but her mind raced. Tomorrow, everything would change for better or worse. As dawn approached, Sekhmetis reflected on her journey. From slave to potential savior, she had come further than she ever imagined. But this wasn't just about Herod. It was about everyone who suffered under oppression. She thought of her mother, sold into slavery years ago, and her father, whose name she barely remembered. Would they be proud of her, or would they beg her to stay safe? Her shadow stretched long across the temple floor, a reminder of the destiny thrust upon her. She clenched her fists, steeling herself for what lay ahead. Whatever happened, she vowed to fight not just for herself, but for those who couldn't. Under the watchful gaze of the moon, Sekhmetis and her allies made final preparations. Nabaman double-checked the scrolls, ensuring every word was clear. Isetnofret practiced her speech, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Meanwhile, Sekhmetis polished the cracked sundial, determined to make it the centerpiece of their revelation. Time was running out, and the stakes grew higher with each passing hour. By the time the first rays of dawn touched the horizon, they were ready. Standing together in the temple's shadowy halls, they exchanged silent nods, their resolve unshakable. The festival awaited, and with it, the chance to change the course of history. The festival of Ra dawned with a sense of awe and anticipation. Thousands gathered before the temple of Ra, their faces turned toward the rising sun, or what should have been the rising sun. Golden banners fluttered in the breeze, and incense filled the air, masking the tension simmering beneath the surface. Priests chanted prayers, their voices echoing across the crowd as Khepriemhet ascended the temple steps. Clad in robes shimmering with golden scarabs, he raised his arms high, calling upon Ra to bless Egypt. The people watched, holding their breath, waiting for the sun to rise fully. But something was wrong. The light faltered, casting long shadows over the city. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Was Ra angry? Had they lost his favor? Before Khepriemhet could continue, a figure emerged from the crowd. It was Sekhmetis. Her heart pounded, but her steps were steady as she climbed the temple stairs, clutching the cracked sundial in her hands. Gasps erupted from the onlookers, a slave daring to enter sacred space. Khepriemhet froze, his face twisting in rage. "What is the meaning of this?" he bellowed, pointing an accusatory finger at her. Ignoring him, Sekhmetis held up the sundial for all to see. "This," she declared, her voice ringing out clear and strong, "is why Ra's light falters. This is why darkness creeps into our land." Murmurs spread like wildfire as the crowd strained to get a better look. The crack in the sundial gleamed under the dim light, a stark symbol of corruption. As if in response to Sekhmetis' words, the sun halted mid-sky, plunging Thebes into an eerie twilight. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, and a chill swept through the air. Statues of Ra began to glow faintly, their eyes seeming to watch the unfolding drama. The crowd fell silent, their fear palpable. Even Khepriemhet seemed shaken, though he tried to mask it with anger. "Lies!" he shouted, stepping toward Sekhmetis. "This is blasphemy. Arrest her!" But no one moved. Instead, the people stared at the glowing statues, then back at Sekhmetis, unsure whom to believe. In that moment, it felt as though the gods themselves were judging them, weighing truth against falsehood. Khepriemhet realized he was losing control. His voice grew shrill as he accused Sekhmetis of sabotage, of conspiring with disgraced spirits to undermine his authority. "She seeks to destroy us all," he cried, his hands trembling as he gestured wildly. Yet his words rang hollow. When Nebamun stepped forward, holding the forbidden scrolls, the high priest's face turned pale. "These scrolls reveal your crimes," Nebamun said, his tone calm but firm. "Rituals altered, offerings stolen, lies told in Ra's name." The crowd murmured in shock, their faith in Khepriemhet crumbling. Desperation seized him, and he lunged at Sekhmetis, shouting curses. But guards intervened, pulling him back as his once unshakable power slipped through his fingers. With Khepriemhet restrained, Nebamun unrolled the scrolls and began reading aloud. Passages detailed years of corruption, bribes accepted, rituals manipulated, and prophecies ignored. Each word struck like a hammer blow, shattering the illusion of holiness surrounding the high priest. The crowd listened in stunned silence, their anger growing with every revelation. Isetnofret added her voice, recounting how she had witnessed these acts firsthand but feared speaking out. "We were blind," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But no longer." The scales of justice tipped visibly, and the people turned their gaze to Sekhmetis, seeing her not as a slave, but as a savior. She stood tall, her shadow stretching long across the temple floor, embodying the prophecy fulfilled. As the truth sank in, the atmosphere shifted. The glowing statues of Ra dimmed, and sunlight slowly returned, bathing Thebes in warm golden light. Cheers erupted from the crowd, mingling with cries of relief and gratitude. Khepriemhet collapsed to his knees, defeated, as guards dragged him away. Stripped of his title and banished from the temple, he disappeared into obscurity. Meanwhile, Sekhmetis stepped forward, addressing the people. "The shadow has fallen," she said, her voice steady, "but light will rise again. Together we can restore balance." Her words resonated deeply, igniting hope in hearts long burdened by oppression. The festival ended not with despair, but with celebration, a new beginning for Thebes. The days following the festival were filled with celebration. The people of Thebes hailed Sekhmetis as a hero, their voices ringing out in gratitude. Merchants offered her gifts, golden amulets, fresh bread, and jars of honey, while children chanted her name in the streets. Elders spoke of her courage as a sign of divine favor, proof that even the lowborn could rise when justice demanded it. Yet Sekhmetis remained humble, refusing to accept riches or titles. Instead, she walked among the people, listening to their stories and sharing her own. Her presence brought hope to those who had long felt powerless, a reminder that change was possible even against overwhelming odds. Though offered freedom to leave Thebes, Sekhmetis chose to stay. She saw too much work left undone, too many wounds yet unhealed. Determined to make a difference, she dedicated herself to teaching others, sharing knowledge once hidden within the temple's walls. In the marketplace, she gathered groups of slaves and laborers, explaining the rituals, prophecies, and traditions that had been kept from them. "Knowledge is power," she told them, her voice firm but kind, "and together we can ensure no one abuses it again." Her lessons sparked curiosity and courage, planting seeds of change that would grow for generations. Nebaman and Isetnofret stood by Sekhmetis, continuing their efforts to reform temple practices and restore transparency. Together, they documented her deeds in scrolls, ensuring her story would be remembered as part of Thebes' enduring legacy. They also worked to rebuild trust between the priesthood and the people, introducing new rituals that emphasized unity and fairness. Slowly but surely, the cracks in the system began to mend. The trio became symbols of resilience, proving that even in the face of corruption, justice could prevail. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, united by a shared vision of a better future. As weeks turned into months, the people of Thebes noticed a shift not just in their leaders, but in themselves. Faith in Ra returned, stronger than ever, as did belief in the principles of Ma'at: truth, balance, and harmony. Statues no longer wept golden tears, and the Nile flowed steadily, its waters reflecting the calm skies above. Sekhmetis often visited the temple, standing before the scales carved into its walls. To her, they symbolized more than cosmic order. They represented the fragile yet powerful balance between oppression and freedom, silence and action. She knew the fight wasn't over, but she also knew they had taken the first step toward lasting change. The prophecy echoed in Sekhmetis' mind long after the festival ended. When the shadow falls upon Ra, the lowborn shall rise. It had come true not just for her, but for everyone who dared to challenge injustice. As she looked out over Thebes, watching the sun set behind the pyramids, she reflected on its meaning. Greatness could emerge from unexpected places, and even the smallest actions could spark monumental change. Her journey had taught her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. And so, as the stars appeared one by one in the night sky, she whispered a prayer to Ra, thanking him for guiding her path and asking for strength to continue it.